Maybe Howie's starting to like us a little bit.
I know this is a trend. It's been like the last two or three moves have been just before a podcast, so maybe he's lightening up a little bit.
Yeah, maybe he's either coming around on us or someone's feeding him the wrong time for when we're recording these podcasts.
That's more likely.
You're probably right. This is the Eagle Eye Podcast, by the way, presented by Nissan. He's Reuben Frank. I'm Dave Zangaro. Not a major move, but the Eagles did just agree to terms with the new tight end, so we'll talk about that a little bit. We have some trade down candidates to get into this week. We talked about the trade ups earlier on the podcast. And then at the end of the pod, we want to go through and rank all 13 of Howie Roseman's drafts. That was a fun exercise. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. But let's start with a little bit of news, Rube. CJ Uzomah, tight end, been in the league for 9 years. Hasn't been super productive, but they bring in a veteran at a spot where they needed some depth.
Yeah, he's had a weird career. He's had a couple seasons where just a couple of years ago, he caught 49 passes for almost 500 yards, 5 touchdowns. He's been with the Bengals most of his career, the Jets the last couple of years. Only caught 8 passes last year. He's 30. I think he just turned 31 possibly. So he's an older guy. He's had an up and down career. He's had some decent seasons. Bring him in and see how it goes. Whether I can sit here and say for sure he's going to be a factor on offense, it's hard to say that, but he's an interesting guy, and he certainly had moments where he's been a pretty good receiver.
Yeah, I think, he's been a decent blocker from what I understand. I haven't really had time to watch. This just happened. I had to go watch his blocking, but Pro Football Focus last year had him graded out as the 4th best run blocking tight end. You always take those grades with a little bit of grain of salt, but they're never like way off base. So, I guess the idea here is that you have a guy who can block, but maybe offers a little bit more in the pass game than Jack Stoll did. I still don't think he's a slam dunk to be on the team. He's going to have to come here and compete, but it was a spot where they needed depth. And I understand why they're doing this before the draft. So how he can control himself when that draft happens and not reach for a tight end, because all of a sudden you realize, oh man, we don't have a tight end 2 necessarily in our building.
Yeah. And I think he's really kind of addressed a lot of positions since free agency started, which really eliminates the need to reach for anybody. You can just kind of let things come to you when you've addressed a lot of. No, they haven't all been huge moves, but you get bodies in here at different positions. You have everything covered, so now you can kind of just really draft best position available for the most part. And this isn't. Look, if Bowers falls in their lap, they're not going to say no. We don't need him. We have a tight end, but. We'll see. I think you're right. I don't think, and I think it's true for a lot of the guys that they've signed since free agency began. Could be anywhere from a contributor to not on the team, and there's a lot of guys like that that they've brought in. So, we'll see how it goes. He's old. He's 31, and he's been in the league since what, 14? 15?
2015 draft.
2015, was he a 5th round pick?
Yeah.
I believe from Auburn. Yeah. So he's a veteran guy, and 2021 he caught 49 for 493 and 5 touchdowns. That's 3 years ago. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and that big season, that was his best receiving season with the Bengals. That led to a 3-year at $22 million contract with the Jets, and he didn't really play up to that.
No.
Well, he definitely didn't play up to that. And then he gets cut this March, and it was a pretty obvious move. He wasn't a big part of their offense. They saved cap space by doing it. It kind of reminds me of this move, signing him of what they did at receiver, getting Devontae Parker and Paris Campbell. Maybe those guys will be contributors. Maybe they won't. Maybe they won't even make the team, but it at least gives you a baseline going into the draft.
And so many of these guys, and you just mentioned 2 of them, Devin White, so many of these guys have had one really good year and have been overall disappointing players. I can't say he's been disappointing because he was a 5, but certainly in 2 years for that kind of money, I think he caught 29 for 290 and 3 touchdowns in 2 years with the Jets. So all these guys have had like flashes. They've had a year where they've been really good. Maybe everything fell in the line as far as coaching and scheme and fit. But for the most part, they've had disappointing careers. So you get them for a low price, but they have possible pretty good payout, pretty good payoff. So a lot of these moves kind of fit into that category.
Who will be the Eagles' tight end 2 in terms of snaps this year, assuming Dallas Goedert is healthy enough to play the most? Who ends up as the 2? Who do you think is most likely?
I think it's going to be someone who's not on the team right now.
Okay.
I think it'll be someone they draft. I don't want to be negative or anything, but I just find it hard to believe a 31-year-old guy who's got caught 8 passes last year.
Coming off an injury. He injured his MCL in December.
Yeah. He's had 4 seasons with 10 or fewer catches. He's been in the league 9 years and he has 192 catches. So you do the math, you're talking about 20 catches a year and he's 31. So it's hard to picture him really coming in and all of a sudden being a 50 catch guy, but it could happen. But I think tight end 2 is someone who's not here yet.
Yeah. You also have to remember that might not be what the Eagles are looking for in that position. They had Jack Stoll in that spot for the last 2 years. He barely caught the football. I think you and I both agree that you probably want to have a little bit more in terms of being a receiver at that position, but I don't think it's necessarily their priority.
No, I think that's a good point. And if he can be, a plus blocker and catch 2 passes a game, then you're happy with that kind of production. If he can help out in the running game, help out in the line of scrimmage, and catch. 2 passes a game is 34 catches for, 700 yards for, 10 yards a catch, 9 yards a catch. Then you're okay with that.
Yeah. Very different body type from. It's funny that him and Grant Calcaterra play the same position. Grant he's still a pretty slender guy. I don't know what he's ever really going to offer you as a blocker.
Yeah.
Albert Okwuegbunam is back. They have Noah Tangiai on the roster. EJ Jenkins.
It's kind of hard to believe somebody isn't going to make the team out of that group.
Noah Tagoa in the lead.
Yeah. So, Calcaterra is interesting because he's got the wheels and he's got good hands. I'm a little surprised he has contributed so little. You'd think just catch a game or something, but it just hasn't happened. So we'll see. It's an interesting position. I still think it's a position of need despite this move.
Yeah, I know. I definitely agree with you. I don't think it's the priority is tight end, but it's a position where they can certainly still stand to add. And I think there will be good options in the middle rounds of this draft and even in the late rounds to add a player.
Yeah.
All right. That's all we have on the new tight end. Want to move on?
Yeah.
We talked about trade ups and some players who made sense for a potential trade up on the last podcast. And I do think that is the more likely scenario, trade up or trade down. I think the trade up just makes more sense where they're sitting at 22, knowing that they've had more success trading up, knowing that they have 8 picks overall in this draft, and knowing Howie Roseman's history, right? I think all of those elements tell you a trade up is more likely, but it's still a non-zero chance they trade down. And the board would have to fall in a certain way for that to happen, for there to not be a player that's worth moving up for, or, there's a situation at 22 where, hey, we like these 3 guys the same. We can drop 4 picks and feel pretty confident we're going to get one of them. That's sometimes the way these things work too.
Yeah. And I think having the 2 second-round picks might make it a little less likely that you're going to get out of 22 and get to, somewhere late in the first or early in the second. But yeah, it is possible. And
on the 3, Howie likes that 3rd round.
Yeah. Hasn't done real well in the 3rd round, but he likes the 3rd round.
He likes it. Yeah.
3rd round doesn't like him. Other than the Super Bowl MVP, I haven't drafted well.
Yeah. And even that was not really.
Yeah, because he ended up
He's a
having
free
to come
agent.
back here to do that. But yeah, the third round has been a wasteland for the most part. Curtis Marsh had a nice career, but other than that, yeah. So we'll see. It's certainly possible that he does get out of 20. It's hard to. I think it's easier to project trade ups because you kind of know who's going to be there, like around 15, 16. But it's a little harder to project trade downs because the farther you go into the draft, the more unknowns there are. But it's a fun exercise.
Yeah. So I have some names in front of me. Do you have some in front of you?
I have some names in front of me.
Okay. Why don't you kick it off? Give me a name.
How about Tyler Guyton?
He's on my list.
I knew he'd be on your list. You love offensive tackles, and he's a guy I think you could get out of 22 and go down probably end of the first and get him. And I think that might make some sense. I would say he might be the most likely guy to trade down for because you don't need to draft him at 22.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy with how deep this draft class is. Like in most years, he probably wouldn't even be there at
True.
22. We've seen some really weak offensive tackle classes where the guys get pushed up and you're going, he's not that great. This is the opposite. There are a lot of really good tackles. He's one of them. I'll kind of combine him with Amarius Mims because I have Mims on my list too.
So do I.
Yeah, this is a good time to just talk about both of those guys. Just two guys who look like they could be Pro Bowl level offensive tackles in this league. Mims certainly doesn't have much experience at all. 8 starts at Georgia. Guyton has 15, so he's almost doubling him up, and still doesn't have that much experience. Both kind of very toolsy players, prototypical size, but inexperienced. Guyton played kind of that tight end H-back role before he went to Oklahoma. So I also think Mims is probably more raw, but maybe has the higher upside of the two.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, if they're both on the board, you're taking Mims. I would think.
I don't know. I understand that because you think gosh, he's 6'7", 340 pounds, and he moves pretty there's a lot to like about him. There's a lot to like about Guyton too, who has drawn a ton of comparisons to Lane Johnson for pretty obvious reasons. Yeah. Went to Oklahoma, did not grow up playing offensive line. And apparently they have a relationship. They know each other. So, maybe if they let Jason Kelce help pick his replacement, they'll let Lane Johnson help pick his replacement.
Yeah, but I think also they knew Kelce was a little closer to hanging him up than Lane might be right now, unless they know something we don't know. He is 33. But yeah, I think they're both solid guys. I think they're both fairly, I don't want to say safe picks, but I think they're fairly high percentage picks. And
I don't know about that, actually. I think there's a level of risk involved when you're talking about someone who's this inexperienced.
There's always a level of risk, but I think they're both pretty solid guys.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm not as convinced about that. I think the upside is there with both of them, but I think it is scary when you're talking about Amarius Mims. He's started 8 games at the college level, and he played well, and seeing him come back and play well.
Jordan Mailata started none.
Sure, but he was not a first round pick. You would not have drafted him in the first round. You did it because he was a 7th round pick, and you thought, well, might as well.
Those 8 games tell you a lot too. I mean, he played at a pretty high level. Mm-hmm. He tested well. But look, any pick, there's probably a little more risk if a guy hasn't played very much. But I like the player.
In terms of Mims, you would go Mims over Guyton? I think I would too.
I think so.
Yeah. Thinking about him with Jeff Stoutland is very exciting.
Yeah, really thinking about any O-lineman with Jeff Stoutland, it's like you have this built-in advantage over anyone else.
You do, and there's always 2 schools of thought on that. Do you try to get him the best prospects, give him first-round picks, or do you try to get later round guys and say, well, he'll turn them into something? I think the answer is both.
Both, yeah.
Yeah. But I think there's validity to get it's such an important position, especially to this franchise. get him the best players possible. And it doesn't mean it's always going to work out. They obviously swung and missed with Andre Dillard in 19, but I think those are the shots worth taking and especially this year. It's so good. The closer we get to this draft, the harder I find it to not think that they're going to leave this first round with one of these really impressive tackles.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you have this kind of talent in the first round, really good players are going to be pushed down to the end of the round or even early in the second.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I guess I gave you Mims after you gave me Guyton. Do you have another name?
Yeah, I mean, I think corners is another position where there's pretty good depth, and I think you could probably, like a guy like Ennis Rakestraw. I think you have him on your list too.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's a guy who would be an intriguing prospect who you can get probably a little bit after, probably early in the second, I would think.
Yeah, maybe late first, early second.
Yeah. But you like him?
I like him. I think he is clearly below the top tier corners. I think,
sure.
You have Teron Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell who have kind of separated themselves. And some people throw Cooper DeJean in there. If you want to, that's fine. Then you have Kool-Aid McKinstry, you have Nate Wiggins, who I think are clear first-round picks. Rakestraw, to me, the pure speed is a little bit of a concern. And like if he had that pure speed, if he ran a 4.4, I think he is a slam dunk first-round pick, but he didn't. So I think end of the first round. So if the Eagles, I find it hard to believe they're sitting there at 22 and think we have to get Rakestraw. But, if it's a bucket, right, and we're talking about like there's a group of players together, it's Rakestraw, Tyler Guyton and maybe a receiver, and they can trade down a few picks, and it happens to be that the receiver and the tackle get taken, I think they'd be okay then to take Rakestraw.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
I have a receiver on my list.
I figured you would.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. This would be a significant trade down, I think. I think he'd trade down into maybe the second round, but Xavier Worthy from Texas, and I know A.D. Mitchell's out there from Texas. He's another one who can kind of put in the same category. But I figured we're having some fun. Why not talk about the guy who broke the 40 record at the combine? I know he's undersized and all that, but the Eagles have like kind of been obsessed with getting that speed element at the receiver position for a long time. And they talked up Quez Watkins for so long because they thought he could add that dynamic to the offense, and it never really panned out the way they expected. Worthy would, he clearly would. He's played a ton of his snaps from the slot. I don't know if I love the idea. I don't think they should feel good if their top pick in this draft is Xavier Worthy. I don't think that's a great allocation of resources, because then you end up with a bunch of day 2 picks, and I don't know if that makes sense. But thinking about him in the offense is fun.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And he would sure be a lot of fun to watch at training camp. What do you see? You learn a lot about your corners so you can keep up with them. But yeah, I mean, it's a fun idea. And I still think wide receiver 3 is an important need on this team, and or just weapon 3, whatever you want to call it. I don't think, CJ Uzomah answers that, that question. But yeah, he's an interesting guy, and I'd love to watch him. I think it's possible. He's on my list. I don't think it's likely.
Yeah, neither do I.
But it's a fun idea.
Yeah, and in general, I think the trade down is less likely. So we're talking less likely of less likely here.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, how many teams want to get to 22 also.
That's always a fair point. It's so easy to say they should trade down, but most teams don't have 32. I should say no teams have 32 players who they're like, yeah, these are first round picks, right? It's not the way this works. So you have to have a team willing to move up.
You have to have a team that has 22 guys who they think are worthy there. So I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah. Anyone else that you wanted to name?
That's who I have on my list. Those three guys, those four guys. Yeah.
Okay. I have one other name. Another one I don't think is likely because I don't know. I think it feels a little redundant, but Chop Robinson,
Yeah.
not a great edge class. I think Laiatu Latu is probably going to be gone. If they use the 22nd pick on him, I think that would be like fair value. Chop Robinson, I'm not totally sold on the player, and it might be redundant when you're looking at like him and Nolan Smith. Do you want two guys on the team who are like toolsy, haven't been productive in college? You don't really know what you're going to get. But if they like a guy like Chop, I don't know if you should use the 22nd pick on him. I think maybe you try to get a little more value and then draft him.
Yeah, that would scare me taking him certainly at 22. But yeah, I don't know how Nolan Smith taking him last year at 30 would affect their chances of taking another edge. I just don't know.
Well, I think not another edge in general, but another edge who kind of is made in the same mold. I think that'll give you a little pause.
Yeah.
Right? Like Latu is just he's different. He's like a defensive end. He's like a big dude.
Sure.
You know what he's going to get. He's going to give you good play against the run. So I think there's at least like a baseline knowledge of what he's going to be. Now, obviously, the medical with him would have to check out, and we don't know. That's a tricky one. You don't know like from team to team if that checks out. But the Eagles have shown if their medical checks out on the guy, they're not afraid to take him when there might be some legit concerns. And we've also seen that if the medical does not check out for them, they don't care what other teams are doing.
No, I think we learned a lot about that from the Landon Dickerson, which turned out to be a real steal where they got him.
I kind of subtweeted Landon Dickerson and DK Metcalf there. Those were the two I was thinking of. I should mention that aloud. I don't know why I'm talking in my head about it.
What's that?
I should like mention what I'm thinking about.
Oh, I see.
With the players. In my head, I'm like, everyone knows I'm talking about DK Metcalf in 19 and Landon Dickerson in 21. Then I realized there might be no one who realizes what I'm talking about, which happens quite often.
Most likely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think we talked last week or the other day, the chances that they stay at 22. Give me a percentage trade up, percentage stay at 22, percentage stay down.
Okay.
I think we'll set around 30 to 35, stay at 22. So let's say 35 and you have 65 more percentage points to play with.
Okay. So I'll say 35% stay there. I'll say you're making me do math and I don't like it. So 45% trade up, 20% trade down. And I think that I might bump up. I might go 40, 50, 10.
40 trade up.
40.
50 stay at. Oh, 40 stay at 22, 50 trade up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good number. I was going to say 50 trade up. I think 15 trade down.
Okay, so around the same.
And the rest, 35 stay at 22.
I got so nervous when you just made me do math. I can do math, but like under pressure math is tricky.
You know, a quick story. I haven't really ever spoken about my brother. My brother was a math genius growing up. Alan, he lives up in Boston. He's still a math genius. He was taking like high school math when he was 2 years older. He still is 2 years older than me. He was taking high school math like in.
Haven't caught up yet?
I'm trying. Like seventh grade, he was in high school, and then like in high school, he was at the local. He was at FDU, taking college math classes. He was like, he was genius. And you ever see that Young Sheldon? Was that the name of that show?
Mm-hmm.
He was Young Sheldon. And one time we were all out at dinner, and my mom or my dad asked, they were figuring out the tip on the on the check, and I forget what percentage. If it was my parents, it probably wasn't a super high percentage. Let's say it was 20% tip, and I calculated it before my brother, and he was so mad he wanted to fight me. And we're in the back, we're in the back seat of the car later, and he's like punching me. Like he was like just pissed that I figured out the tip faster than him. I don't know why that just came back to me, but
I always just double the first number. It's about 20%, right? Typically.
I typically it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just get my phone out and multiply by like too much.
I'm not pulling the phone out. I'm kind of guessing, and then yeah. I sometimes I give a tip by feel too.
The most important thing is I make sure I have the right credit card after I leave the restaurant.
That's always a good move. All right, let's move on from these trade up and trade down possibilities and talk about Fletcher Cox a little bit. We mentioned on our last pod, we recorded on Tuesday just before his press conference. I got a chance to go over there and hear Fletcher talk. It was kind of cool. It's a much different Fletcher Cox than we're used to during the season, when he's a lot of all business throughout the week. And he's a fun guy generally, but like during the week, he was always locked in, relaxed. Like that was the first thing that really stood out to me. Just super relaxed Fletcher Cox, his entire family there for his retirement presser, which I thought was very cool. He said that they were all there when he got drafted in 2012. So he wanted them all there when he retired. And then it was a really cool photo seeing all those guys and women and children up on the stage with him.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. Man, it just seems like yesterday they drafted him. He's the last guy I got right in a mock draft in the first round.
They traded up for Fletcher.
Yeah, they did. I don't remember if I had to trade up in my mock or I just had him taking him, but yeah, and he deserves his moment just as much as Kelsey, and I'm glad he was able to do it, and his family was there. It was cool.
I thought back, one of the first times I ever covered the Eagles was his rookie training camp, and it was the last time at Lehigh. And I remember thinking it was so cool. I got a one-on-one interview with Fletcher because I just waited him out. He was doing like extra work after practice, and I waited him out. And I was like, it was such a cool moment for me that I'm like super young at this, and I get time with the first round pick. And he chatted. He was, it's like he has no idea that was, what I mean? But like for me, that was a very cool moment. And to see it come full circle, and I'm there at his retirement press conference after a borderline Hall of Fame career is very fun.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you who my experience with that kind of thing is, but I think we've all had that. You're standing there like, and I mean, when you're a young kid, you don't show it, but you can still be a little bit in awe. I mean, when I started covering the Eagles, Reggie White was, hey,
who's
Reggie,
the last guy you talked to and you're like, wow, I'm talking to this guy?
Probably you. The last guy.
Like there's some moments here and there, like the last couple, like talking to Julio this year was cool, but I wasn't like in awe.
Yeah, I would say, it was just a couple of years ago when Brady was in for joint practices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was, I think I asked him one question. I can't remember what it was. It was about Curtis Marsh, but remember that? He went 19 for 19 targeting.
How's Dion Lewis acclimating to the system?
But yeah, that was pretty wild.
Yeah. Cool. We have cool jobs. It's fun sometimes.
We really do. We have the best jobs.
The other stuff from Fletcher, I did ask him about the Hall of Fame and how much thought he's given to it. Some players will tell you like, look, out of my hands, I don't really care. But he was honest. He said it is something he's thought about. He apparently was just talking to Howie Roseman about it before the press conference, and said like it'll help to get in the Eagles Hall of Fame first, which tells you that's coming down pretty soon. A lot of these guys are going to have to go in the Eagles Hall of Fame.
Yeah. How many guys from the 17 team? You're talking. Ertz will go in, Foles will go in, Fletch, Kelsey, Lane will go in, Corey Graham,
Malcolm
definitely will go in.
Brandon Brooks.
Probably not. Probably
Really?
not.
I think so. 3-time Pro Bowler, best
Yeah,
player at his
I don't
position.
think he'll be in the Eagles Hall of Fame. I just don't think he played here long enough. He was here 5 years. One of them he was hurt. He had 4 years as a starter, 3 Pro Bowls. I love the guy, but I'm guessing no.
Okay. Think about who else. We're probably missing like an obvious one.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of those guys on that team were like kind of just passing through, and had like, I mean, do you put in like,
Jason Peters technically on that team. He'll be there.
Yeah, he didn't play that year, but or he didn't play in the postseason. But yeah, he. I mean, that's 6 from 17. I mean, Alshon, Carson won't. Jay Ajayi, Corey Clement, LeGarrette, Nelly won't. Jake Elliott will.
Yeah, most
likely.
Can they put Donnie Jones in just so Donnie can come hang out for a day?
Oh, BG. There we did forget somebody.
BG I thought we mentioned him. Okay, sure.
BG will be in there. Corey Clement. They should put Corey Clement, and there should be like a wing for Corey Clement and Trey Burton. There should be some place for them. But I think that's probably it. I don't think Justin Hamilton will get in.
Dustin Evayo.
Sproles probably not.
He works for the team.
Yeah.
Which doesn't hurt.
Maybe he can vote himself in.
Selleck?
I don't think Selleck's getting in.
I mean, they refused to give out his number for 5 years.
Yeah. I had a long talk a couple of years ago. I think when was his last? That was his last year, right?
Yeah, because he announced his official retirement at that 97.5 Fan Fest because I think he went for a visit in Detroit, or Detroit had some interest in him, and then he just retired.
Yeah. He's a tricky one. Like, never made a Pro Bowl, but was here a long time, played his whole career here, was a really good player. I was told that he wasn't getting in. Like, he probably isn't going to get in. Mm-hmm. I don't know. He's a borderline guy for me. Only had 3 years with 50 catches. He's a tricky one. I'm going to guess no.
Okay. Man, we are way off here.
That's like 7 guys, though, from the 17 team.
That's a lot. Fletcher's a no doubter, though.
What's that?
Fletcher's a no doubt.
It's crazy that it'll be, in 3 years, it'll be the 10th anniversary of that team.
Mm-hmm.
They should put them all in that year. They'll probably all be, Nick Foles probably still won't have retired. How about Rodney? Rodney's not a, love him, but probably falls a little short.
Yeah.
He's kind of in that Selleck range. Yeah. Anyway.
That was it. Just getting a chance to talk to Fletch. He said, he's taking things slow in retirement, which whatever your approach is, it's your prerogative. I like that approach because I think sometimes guys get out of the league and they think all of a sudden, like, I got to figure out what the heck I'm doing. But he seems happy to kind of take a breather for a while and to let things kind of fall where they fall.
There's some guys you worry about, like, how are they going to figure out what's next, what they're good at, what they like, what's rewarding. I just think it's so hard to replace, the routine. That's what Kelsey talked about late in the season. He's like, the thing that worries me the most about retiring isn't what am I going to do? It's like, how am I going to replace that routine of, like, each day everything's kind of planned out for you. And for 13 years he had the same routine or very similar, and he just talked about how that's going to be really tough to not have that. Like, all of a sudden, like, I feel like I need to go in the NovaCare and lift, and I'm home.
Yeah.
But
and Kelsey is going to the NovaCare to lift.
What's that?
Kelsey is still going to the NovaCare to lift.
Probably wouldn't surprise me. Fletcher's a guy I don't worry about. He'll be fine. He's got a lot of interests. He's got a lot of things going on, and he'll find his way.
The one cool thing he mentioned was that he still wants to be involved with the young players on this team.
Yeah.
He still wants to help them develop. He wants them to call him with questions, and he wants to be available for them. I thought that's very cool because it became a big part of his job late in his career and a big part of what he wanted his legacy to be. But I thought it's cool that he's telling Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, like, no, you have a question, call me. Like, we'll go over whatever you want. I think that's very nice.
The keys to the kingdom. And that's all part of the culture that, that they've built here, even before Nick, just guys passing down their wisdom, whatever they have, to the younger guys. And you love to see that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say one more time. I mean, Fletcher played really well this year. And it's interesting he's walking away after the season he had. Maybe it's easier because he had that one last really good season. Could have made the Pro Bowl. I mean, I thought he was one of the better interior linemen in the NFC. But like we talk about how much they're gonna miss Kelsey. I mean, they're gonna miss Fletch. I mean, they have other guys. They're gonna really miss him.
Yeah, that's the thing is like they're gonna miss both of those guys on the field so much. They were very good players still.
Yeah.
So a little bit of news since the last pod. The Packers are the Eagles' opponent in Sao Paulo, Brazil on September 6th. I think that's a relatively hard draw for the Eagles.
Yeah, up-and-coming team. They finished last year really strong. Their young quarterback was really starting to play well. How much carryover there is, you never exactly sure. Things change, but I see them as one of the real up-and-coming teams in the NFC. Really talented bunch, and I think that's you're losing a home game, which every team's going to do at some point. So, but to open with them away from home, certainly not as bad as playing them in Lambeau, but for a home game to not be at the Link against that team, that's a very tough draw on a Friday evening.
Yeah, and imagine losing that game. You have a 9.5-hour flight after a loss. You're in Brazil.
Not ideal.
Not ideal.
But it's probably a longer flight to Green Bay.
I'm curious to see how draining this is. It's a lot to fly that far and to fly back in a short span. Like, you have no option. Like, you got to do it, and the sports science department's going to figure out the best ways to maximize and to not have a negative impact. But I don't know. It's something I'll be monitoring. Like, to start off that way is going to be a little exhausting.
Yeah. Now, we're kind of assuming they're going to play the following Monday. We won't know that for a couple more weeks, but certainly not a lock. I would think they'll have all kinds of stuff. Like, I mean, you want to get them off their feet on the plane. You don't want them sitting there for 9.5, 10 hours. Got to keep them hydrated. But, you want everyone to stretch, get their legs stretched. You worry about on flights like that, you worry about blood clots, honestly. I mean, it's, people that sit on planes for long periods of time are really prone to blood clots because their legs are compressed and not moving for, half the day. So there's certainly a lot to, I think they do a good job with sports science, and they have since Chip was here, but it's a concern. Yeah, and not just that game, but like just moving on, like what kind of shape are you in for the following game and the game after that? So, I wonder, like a plane, you need a pretty big plane to get from Brazil to like Philly. Philly airport can handle any kind of plane, but what about Green Bay airport? Can you fly like a jet that's large enough to fly 10 hours from Brazil to the Midwest, northern Midwest? Can that plane land at Green Bay Airport? We've been to that airport. I mean,
I actually never have been to that airport.
Oh, really? Just Appleton?
Mm-hmm.
I flew into Green Bay, I think once or twice. Usually Appleton, Milwaukee. Maybe they'll fly into Milwaukee and then bus up. That would be awful. I don't know. I'm worried. I'm concerned about that.
We'll tell the Packers.
Worried about the Packers travel plans. But it is a lot. You're right. It's a lot. And I'm sure they're already working on that. I mean, that's, you fly to San Francisco, that's 4.5 hours back. It's 5.5 hours out there. This is like almost double that. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot.
Yeah, jet lag's real. I mean, I've
Yeah.
experienced it. It's a real thing.
You're
It's
not really changing time zones with 2 hours. So jet lag
yeah,
isn't really a huge concern, the time difference. But to me, it's just being at a cramped airplane, and they have big seats, but it's it's a lot, and it sounds like if they're it's not going to be a long trip down there. So two of those flights in 3 or 4 days. I mean, that's a concern.
yeah, a lot of logistics to work through, and the team is doing that right now.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a break, and on the other side, we will rank every Howie Roseman draft class so far.
You deserve a car that thrills you, a car that puts goosebumps on your goosebumps. At Nissan, we got everything from turbocharged SUVs to 100% electric vehicles that'll make your heart beat faster. Experience the thrill for yourself and shop your local Nissan store at nissanusa.com today.
Celebrity cook Steve Martorano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martorano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations at Martorano's Prime on Open Table. All right, Rube. This is fun. Howie Roseman has had 13 drafts since he's been GM. Now, obviously, the beginning of his tenure, we've talked about this. Andy Reid was still here, but we'll still give them to Howie, good, bad, and different. And then 2015 does not count. That was the Chip Kelly year. Howie was out of personnel. He was ordering tape. So
he was on the other side of the building, as Jason
other side of the building
eloquently.
So
now, how do you want to do this? You want to start at the bottom?
Yeah, I think we work our way up to his best draft. We'll start off with number 13, and we'll go off your list, and I'll kind of tell you where I disagree throughout.
And I don't know if you saw my note, but I flip-flopped 1 and 2.
I did, and I'm upset you did that because we're going to be different there, and now we're not.
Yeah, I kind of – and there's some really tricky things. We'll get into them, like Kelsey in the 6th round. Like, how do you evaluate Carson as a draft pick? There's some interesting things happening. But for the worst draft, I think Howie's worst draft, and it was his last draft for a couple of years, was that 2014 draft. Marcus Smith in the 1st round. Jordan Matthews was a decent player for 3 years, but then he ended up. He was only here 3 years and went to Buffalo. He came back, but and then the rest of that draft: Josh Huff in the 3rd, Jalen Watkins in the 4th, Taylor Hart, Ed Reynolds, Bo Allen, and Bo Allen was okay, but I mean, really, Jordan Matthews was the only starter you got out of that draft, and was only here a few years. So, Marcus Smith in the 1st round, Josh Huff in the 3rd round didn't do anything. I had a couple kick returns. That's a pretty bad draft.
Yeah, I totally agree on 2014. Don't have much to add, and I wonder if Howie would kind of be like, yeah, well, Chip was in my ear in 2014 telling which players he wanted.
Yeah, I'd love to know. I mean, I think there was something to that. I mean, Chip wasn't the GM, but I don't think it was a healthy situation, certainly.
Yeah, and there's a story that we've heard before about Taylor Hart, Chip wanted him in the 3rd round, and Howie's like, no, we can get Taylor Hart later. Relax with the Oregon guy.
Yeah. Yeah, so they took Josh Huff instead. The next worst for me was 2017. It was a draft that I really liked when they made it. Derek Barnett in the 1st round. I thought Sidney Jones was a steal in the 2nd round. Rasul in the 3rd round, who's still playing and has really ended up having a nice career, but was not a great player here. Matt Collins, Donnell Pumphrey never even played. Shelton Gibson, Nate Gary, who played but was not very good, and Elijah Qualls. I mean, you can make a case for that being last. I think Barnett, was a functional player. Rasul was a functional player for a little bit, but
Nate Gary was not a bad pick
in the 5th round.
Yeah, it was just that they ended up asking him to do too much.
Yeah, the difference for me between 17 and 14 is that Barnett, although disappointing career, I mean, Marcus Smith was no career. So Barnett at least was contributing.
I was very close to putting this one a spot higher, and the next one on your list a spot lower, but I ended up spending too much time thinking about it and said it doesn't really matter. So um, it's your list. But yeah, I was very close to bumping this one up because at least Derek Barnett was a functional player as a first round pick. The next guy didn't really play.
And the next had been 2019, Andre Dillard. For me, the reason that draft is above the 17 one is Miles Sanders, who had a nice career here, made a Pro Bowl. Never quite. He was never great. I mean, he was a really good back. I always thought his numbers were better than the play, kind of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, he always had, he always averaged 4.7, 4.8. Didn't play well in the postseason. Was usually banged up by then. But the rest of that draft, and Miles was a Pro Bowler, so you give him that. But J-Jaw in the second round, Dillard in the first round, J-Jaw in the second round, and then Sharif Miller, a guy who never played, didn't have a third round pick that year. Clayton Thorson in any round. That's a pretty bad draft, and you can certainly justify putting that lower.
Yeah, I kept going back and forth. I think I would have it lower, just because you got nothing after you got one player in that draft.
Yeah, you're right.
Whereas at least in 17, Barnett was somewhat functional. Rasul gave you some really good games here and there, and then Nate Gary was a special teamer. Like at least there was something.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's totally fair. I put 19 ahead of 17 just because Miles became a pretty big part of this, this offense.
And in a Super Bowl year, which I think gives it a little bit of a boost.
Yeah. Although it was weird. That whole day was weird. I mean, he just kind of left the game and was a non-factor. The next one, and like the next couple, are tough because it's really too early to evaluate. Certainly last year and even the year before, we don't know what Nakobe's going to turn into. We don't know what Cam Jurgens is going to. But I went 2022 next.
So 2022 at 10, and then 2023 at 9.
Yeah. Jordan Davis, I don't know. I don't know if I think there's a good chance he won't be worth where they picked him. Cam Jurgens is okay. We don't know anything about Nakobe. I don't have a great feeling about him. And the others are, Kyron Johnson and Grant Calcaterra. So we'll see, but I'm not super optimistic about that draft.
Yeah, I'm more optimistic about 23 just because of Jalen Carter. I think the Eagles got a very, very good player with all pro potential, whereas I don't see that in the 22 draft. I think Cam Jurgens you said he was okay. I still think that's a big question mark because I think he could be a very good center, but we just don't know.
Yeah, and he had a lot of injuries last year. He didn't play his rookie year, so he could come in and be a Pro Bowl center. I mean, with Stout, it's certainly possible. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that's projection. Did you have those next two among your next couple drafts, or?
Yeah. Oh no, I had them in. I was fine with where you put them. Just okay. It's really tricky. I think the other, like the ones below that, we know are bad. Yeah. Those two, I just don't know yet.
And 2023 has a chance to. I mean, I still think Sidney and Keeley have a chance to be players.
Mm-hmm. I think so. 23, I think when we look back at this in 5 years, could be way higher.
It could be. I mean, Tyler Steen could be a starter, could be starting guard. Keeley could be starting corner. And Sidney could be. They, and I think Jalen Carter by that point is going to be a Pro Bowler, so it's possible, certainly.
All right. So then, at 8, what did you have?
I had that 2016 draft, and this was a tricky one because Carson, I think it was a really good draft pick. I think. Yeah.
I had it much higher, by the way.
Okay, that's fair. Big V was your it was a starter, was starting left tackle in the Super Bowl run. Isaac Seumalo had a nice run as a guard. Wendell Smallwood was what he was. Didn't have a 2 and a 4 in that draft, and you still came up with 2 full-time starters, 2 part-time starters. Jalen Mills also in that draft, who was a Super Bowl starter. So yeah, there's some talent in that draft. It certainly could be higher.
I had it all the way at 5.
Okay.
Yeah, just because I really liked the Wentz pick, and I think it was a good draft pick. And I liked the process there. I liked the aggressiveness from Howie. Malu, I know it took a while, but he ended up being a high level starter. Big V started left tackle in the Super Bowl. Jalen Mills, Super Bowl starter as a 7th-round pick. I thought that's a pretty good draft class. And I know in hindsight, the whole Carson thing makes it really almost impossible to rank it. But yeah, I was higher on this one than you were.
Yeah, that's fair. And I really struggle with this one and what to do with it. And I struggle with the next one as well. And I think if you take into account everything that went for the Eagles to get to 2, everything Howie did to get to 2, it was some of his best work. The trades that came before it, not just because of what he got, because of what he gave away, what he got rid of, what he unloaded. So you probably have a good point there with 2016 could be higher. The next one for me was the most difficult one to evaluate, just because you're getting a Hall of Famer in the 6th round. So is that a great pick, or are you stupid because you drafted Alex Henry, Curtis Marsh, Casey Matthews, Jaquan Jarrett, Julian Vandervelde, and Deion Lewis before him, and Fireman Danny? So Kelsey was the only guy. That's all you got from that draft. But look what he is. He's maybe the greatest center to ever play the game. So I didn't know what to do with that draft. I think when you look back, they missed on everybody except the greatest player in Eagles history, one of them. So where did you put 2011?
I had it at 7th. Yeah, you're right. It's really tricky. Alex Henry is the only non-position player the Eagles have drafted under Howie.
Interesting.
So the only kicker.
4th round, though. That's just...
It was awful. Yeah.
Terrible.
And look, he was I guess he was accurate early, but
he had no range.
Yeah. The Watkins,
and he was at the beginning of the era where guys are making 52, 53, 54 yarders like they're layups.
Yeah, it was he kind of got caught in the changing of the guard at that position, and he was of the last generation.
Right. Right. In the 90s, he would have been all pro because he could make 90% of his field goals from 45 and under.
Not only was Danny Watkins a bad player, but the process was awful.
Yeah.
So that's the tough part there, is not only did you get a bad player, but you drafted a guard in the 1st round, an old guard in the 1st round, a guy who didn't love football in the 1st round. There were so many factors that make that, to me, the worst pick in Howie history. That's
a fair point. And how did they not know, with all the due diligence, and maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, 13, it wasn't as big of the pre-draft process, but how did they not know that he didn't want to play the game? How do you miss that? And
because I'll fake a lot to make money.
Yeah. But these days they're talking to high school coaches, teachers, teammates. I just think they do more. And you get past that pick, and then you're getting Jaquan Jarrett in the 2nd round, who lasted a year, barely played, and got cut in the middle of his 2nd year. And then Curtis Marsh, who was just a non-factor, and then Casey Matthews, who they tried to get him on the field, and it just didn't go well. And then Alex Henry. These are all.
Hey, they got a starter in Brian Roll.
He started a few games. If it wasn't for Kelsey, this would have been one of the worst drafts in NFL history.
Mm-hmm. But they did take Kelsey.
Yes, they did.
All right. So then after that one, or before that one, what'd you have next?
So we have 6 to go. And in 6th place, I have the 2010 draft, which is Howie's first as GM. And he had been here, certainly, but officially as GM. And it was still a big red draft. But BG in the 1st round, good player for a long time, very good player later in his career. You got Nate Allen, who was a starting safety. Looking at it now, and Riley Cooper was he actually was pretty good for a few years. Kurt Coleman was a starter for a while. Not a lot of great players, but you got some pieces. Teo in the 3rd round doesn't help. Keenan Clayton, Clay Harbor. Clay Harbor played.
For a 4th round pick.
Yeah, Clay watches the podcast, so we got to say nice things about him. Probably one of the top 10 tight ends in the history of the game. And I think he
Jamar
was,
Chaney, you
yeah,
know, if he was
those
just
guys played.
yeah, like and for a 7th round pick, like I think that's okay.
Yeah, um, it wasn't a great draft. Nate Allen was like the kind of player who, I mean, he was just there. Like I think he had an interception in each of his first 3 games, which is kind of weird to think back to. We thought he was going to be like this superstar. But he started for 5 years and he was okay. Kurt Coleman got a lot of interceptions for a 7th round pick. Had a nice long career, mainly in other places, but they got some pieces in that draft. It wasn't a great draft. I think one thing you're seeing, and I think this is true for every team, like nobody's hitting on anybody. I mean, Howie's a 2-time executive of the year. He's considered one of the better judges of talent. He's probably a borderline Hall of Fame GM, and he's not nailing all the picks in any of these drafts. So,
Yeah.
Where did you have that 2010 draft?
I had 2010 at 8.
At 8, okay.
Yeah. So I had 2010 at 8, 2011 at 7. We'll get to 2020. I had that at 6, and then I had 2016 at 5.
Okay. So we just flip-flopped 2010 and 2011.
Mm-hmm.
We had those.
Well, I had 16 much higher.
Yeah, but those two we
sure.
flip-flopped. So then 5th, I had 2020 basically because of Jalen. If and this is kind of like, I mean, Carson helped. Carson was part of a Super Bowl team, but wasn't part of the playoff run that year. They wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for him. But Jalen was an MVP candidate that year. He could have been the MVP of the Super Bowl, had a historic performance. So I think, and look, he wasn't as good last year, but you still have a franchise quarterback that you got. I think if you draft a franchise quarterback and nail that pick, which I believe they did, I think that lifts that draft up. Now, they didn't get a whole lot else. Jack Driscoll was a functional guy for a few years. Quez had one really good year. Jalen Reagor certainly in the first round doesn't help.
Yeah, and that's another one to me. Bad pick, bad process, which makes it worse.
With Reagor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then Davion Taylor in the 3rd round doesn't help. I mean, he gave him a lot of opportunities. Kayvon in the 4th, Driscoll in the 4th, John Hightower, Sean Bradley, who's a free agent right now, coming off that injury. Prince Tega, Casey Toole still in the league. I think that there's 4 to go for me. Oh, did we have the same top 4? I take it
same top 4, different order, but same top 4.
So I think those are Howie's 4. I think there's a big gap between the top 4 and the rest.
I agree with that.
Where he was getting multiple really good players early, and in each case, or in 3 of the cases, a really good player late. So for number 4, I have that 2013 draft. Lane in the 1st round, Zach Ertz in the 2nd round. I mean, that's a really good 1-2 punch. Benny Logan started some games. He was okay. Jordan Poyer still in the league. Didn't do anything here, but made a Pro Bowl with the Bills. Has a really nice career. But as far as a Howie draft, it's really the 1-2 punch of Lane and Zach, 2 guys who were pivotal in that 17 team. And Lane obviously still here. Zach Ertz still playing in the league 11 years later.
I had that at 3.
Okay.
Off
So
the
I had
straight
2012 at 3.
Huh?
I had 2012 at 3. Did you have that at 4?
I had that at 2.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm. I had 2021 at 4. And I think that will continue to rise. It's just a little early for me to put it that high.
Yeah.
Obviously, with Devontae and Landon, like they're going to keep playing at a really high level. And to me, that like he asked me in a year it'll be higher. He asked me it'll keep moving up. But right now, I have it below the other ones.
Okay. Number 3 at 2012. I mean, Fletch and Nick Foles right there. That's a pretty good one. Nick in the 3rd. But Michael Kendricks, what I would say probably had a disappointing overall career as a 2nd-round pick, but played really well in 17. On and off starter. Vinny Curry in the 2nd round also had one really good year. Overall disappointing career. Brandon Boykin had one really, really good year. And then injuries kind of ended his career prematurely. Bryce Brown had 2 really, really good games. And that was all we heard from him. I believe Brandon Washington is the last player that Howie took. How many players has Howie drafted that never played? Brandon Washington never played. Donnell Pumphrey never played.
Clayton Thorson.
Clayton Thorson never played.
Charles Scott never played.
Charles Scott, you're right, never played. Did Marvin McNutt ever get in a game?
I don't think so.
Jacoby Stevens, I don't believe ever got in a game.
Yeah.
Marvin McNutt got in 4 games in 2012.
Alex McAllister? I don't think so. I think he went to Canada.
Jacoby Stevens played in 2 games for the Eagles in 2021. McAllister never played in a game. Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, to get a Super Bowl MVP and a borderline Hall of Fame defensive tackle, that's pretty good drafting. And 2 other guys, really 3 other guys that were pretty good players at one point.
Yeah. And then at number 1, we both agreed, maybe the key to this whole thing is to not have so many picks where you squander them. They only made 5 picks in 2018, and they were all pretty good picks.
Yeah, and I think we're in agreement that we have that in the top spot. 2021, I have second, which is Devontae and Landon, Milton Williams. Kenny Gainwell brings it up a little bit. But 2018, Goddard in the second round, and not just no first round, no third round either.
Yeah.
And then
Devontae, remember, that was they had 32. They were happy to listen to the Ravens when they called to trade up to get Lamar Jackson, and they traded back, and then they traded back up to get Goddard.
Right. So Goddard, Avante, Josh Sweat, and Jordan Mailata in the 7th. The only miss, and it's not a miss, when Matt Pryor is still in the league, I think, in the 6th round pick. Can't consider that a miss. So really, to have that kind of production without a 1 and a 3 is incredible. Probably Howie's best moment was the 2018 draft.
Yeah, and they traded to get Mailata too. Like everyone, like it's one thing to just take the guy, but they made sure that they got him. You know what I mean? It wasn't like
I've never played before.
Yeah, they moved up 17 spots.
Yeah,
to make sure they got this guy.
So you had 2012 second?
Yeah.
So you went 2018, 2012, 2013, 2021?
Yeah. And like I said, 2021 will continue to rise.
Yeah.
I just think that based on like the longevity of the careers of the other guys who have played, I couldn't do that yet.
Sure. And, we didn't mention Marlon Tuipulotu was a 6th round pick in that 21 draft who's a factor. I mean, he plays, he contributes. He's not an all-pro, but he's still around. And
Patrick Johnson
in the 7th round. Zach McPherson in the 4th round. He has a chance to be a slot this year. So if he's healthy, he could make the team. So, I mean, the only guys who are not in the program anymore are Jacoby Stevens. And
that's it.
Yeah.
Teron's still he was on the practice squad last year.
Futures guy, right? They brought him back, I believe. So, yeah. 2012, 2013, 2018, 2021. So Howie's kind of due to nail this one.
All right, that was fun.
Yeah.
We should probably wrap this up. We're over an hour at this point. That took a while, which I figured it would. But if you enjoy the Eagle Eye podcast, you know what to do. Rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like button, subscribe there as well. Any final words, Rube?
No, well, we're 2 weeks from the draft, 2 weeks from today.
Yeah, very exciting. We're almost there, and then we'll see what Howie can pull off this year. That's it. This has been the Eagle Eye podcast presented by Nissan. Reuben Frank, Dave Zangaro. We'll talk to you next week.